Buongiorno a tutti. Greetings from Rome. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to the first installment of our new series, Espresso, a shot of Unconventional Italy. My name is Silvia Dall'Olio and I serve as the Executive Director of the Notre Dame Rome Global Gateway. I'm thrilled to see many old friends with us today who have passed through the Rome Gateway either in person or virtually over the years. And also many new participants as we enter our conversation on contemporary Italy around and beyond the stereotypes that still accompany her. We hope that you will enjoy the format and the topics of our Espresso series and will feel free to actively participate during the session today and in the future. This series is made possible by a number of colleagues who are fantastic collaborators and truly enjoyable people to work with. First of all, I'd like to thank Costanza Montanari, who has made this project a reality from our initial concept. Danilo Domenici on the technical side, the Center for Italian Studies, the Notre Dame Alumni Association, Think and and especially Mary Scott for all the help in promoting this event. Our moderator today is Ryan Kim, Notre Dame graduate of 2019, former participant in our Rome International Scholar Program, current PhD student in physics at Florida State University, and lover of all things Italian. The first time I met Ryan over Zoom in 2017, he did not speak any Italian and was trying to figure out a way to come to study abroad in Rome and conduct research at Sapienza University. Not only did he manage to come and do that and become proficient with the language in the meantime, but he also has maintained his ties and friends in Rome ever since, including some kids that he has tutored in math and English during their time in Rome and virtually during this current pandemic. So it is an honor to be counted among your friends, Ryan, and to have you here as the moderator of the Espresso series. I will leave the floor to you to introduce our guest speaker, another alumna and friend, Elizabeth Simeri. Thank you, Elizabeth, for accepting our invitation and for sharing your knowledge and passion for Italian food with us today. Ryan, you're up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia, for the wonderful introduction. And it's really, really fantastic to reconnect with you and the rest of the Rome Global Gateway. I see some familiar names. It's really fantastic to see everybody. Actually, that Zoom meeting that you mentioned in 2017, I keep thinking back to that because that was the first time that I had ever interacted with somebody via Zoom. And I didn't know that that would be such a big part of my life now in 2021, 4 years later. My whole life is basically on Zoom. So in a sense, thank you for kind of introducing that, that platform and also for introducing Italy in the process as well. Both Zoom and I guess Italy too has kind of become a big part of my life now as well. Yeah, so I had a really fantastic time being in Italy with the Rome program. I guess just to let the audience know a little bit too, I lived with a host family during my time there in Italy. So I got to experience a lot of the Italian language, culture, food, and got to learn the language as well, like Sylvia mentioned, taking on an Italian minor on top of the physics major that I was doing. So even though most of what I do now is physics as a PhD student, it's really fantastic to have a little bit of a break during my day and engage in a little bit of the Italian culture through this series. So I'm very excited to be the moderator with you guys. With this 4-part series, I get to kind of introduce and hopefully bring interesting and entertaining discussions on the topics that we have chosen. I know we have a wide background of people, but hopefully we can have something for everybody here. So today's topic is food, and as you guys probably all know, that there's a lot of stereotypes, especially in America, when it comes to Italian foods. And we have brought a speaker, Elizabeth Samari, who will kind of shed light on some of these stereotypes and have a fantastic presentation for us. Elizabeth was originally from Rochester, Minnesota, in the U.S. She received her BA at the University of Notre Dame in Italian and English back in 2008. And then she lived in Palermo, Sicily in that year. And then after graduation, went to Florence and did her master's in Italian with a specialization in food and literature from Middlebury College in 2010. And since then, she's lived in Rome, working at the Vatican newspaper as an assistant editor from 2010 to 2016. She is also a certified sommelier and gives private food and wine tours in Rome and all around Italy as well. So she is an expert when it comes to Italian food, culture, and wines. And lastly, currently she's a lecturer of food and wine studies at Loyola University Chicago, as well as the Gusto Lab International Food Systems and Sustainability. So we have a wonderful speaker here today with us, and she will start us off with a presentation on foods in Italy, besides the normal pizza and pasta that we might be thinking about. So Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. Okay, to start, I'm going to show you guys all of, let's see here. Okay. Okay. Can you see my slides now? Correct? Okay, great. So just like a shot of espresso is strong and concentrated, today we are going to take a quick but specific look at a small corner of Rome where much of Roman cuisine comes from. It's true that Romans, like most Italians, do eat pizza and pasta. We can't deny that. But there are lots of other local specialties that dominate cuisine and people's daily cuisine all around Italy. You could spend a lifetime learning about all of the local specialties that go from north to south and east to west. So today we're going to use Rome as a sort of test case for that. And we are going to look at the number of dishes that are connected to the city's history that can't be found anywhere else. We are going to look at Testaccio. You can see on the slide here, this is one of the main piazzas in Testaccio. And it's a place where the contemporary and tradition collide. It's a neighborhood with street art and vibrant cuisine, modern eateries, nightlife, all collide with a 2,000-year-old history. In this first section of our discussion today, we're going to look at how history has dictated what Romans are still eating today, and what was built in the past is still influencing what people are eating in the present. So Testaccio is on the south side of Rome. You can see right on the bottom of the screen here. So we're going to talk about two different places in Testaccio. The first is the slaughterhouse. This is a current picture of the slaughterhouse today. Slaughterhouse in Italian is called mattatoio. And in post-unification Italy in the 19th century, the city of Rome started to make this section of Rome, Testaccio, a blue-collar center for industrial Rome. They wanted to move the slaughterhouse, which was once in Piazza del Popolo, down to the south of Rome to Testaccio. Today, the slaughterhouse is both a contemporary art museum and a department for architecture and one of Rome's most famous universities. So Rome was, the population of Rome began increasing after unification, and so did the demand for meat. So with this demand for meat, they decided to move the slaughterhouse, and the finer cuts of meat have always been given to the wealthy. And as a result, the butchers, the people who were bringing all of the animals into the slaughterhouse, were left with the scraps, and those parts that really no one wanted to eat, that today are mostly thrown away, at least in the US for the most part. So one of the ways that the butchers and those taking care of the animals were paid were with these scraps, these leftovers. This cuisine started to be called the quinto quarto. Now, the quinto quarto means the fifth quarter. The fifth quarter is, of course, mathematically impossible, I believe. I'm not a math expert, but and that is literally the leftover parts, the offal, the innards, all of these things that most people don't even touch. Most people don't even see, right? So I have a few pictures of just the inside of the slaughterhouse so you can get an idea. This is the slaughterhouse today, but it's been preserved in a way that you can really see what the process of and the path of the animals through. So they came walking in and they came out hanging on these hooks. Let's see, what else did I want to tell you? Okay, so let's just get right into the dishes. This is a dish called coda alla vaccinata. Coda means tail, and vaccinata comes from the vaccinari, who were the cow herders who brought these animals into the slaughterhouse. So literally this is the fifth quarter, right? The tail, the end of the animal that no one wanted and that perhaps no one's even thinking about eating anymore. But let me tell you, these they came up with a really extraordinary dish. These dishes are, for the most part, taking something that is really looks inedible, looks like you would want to throw away, and cooking it for a very long time and in really different ways to make it into something delicious. So in this case, we have oxtail. You can kind of make out the oxtail itself in the dish here. The recipe calls for pound for pound the same amount of oxtail as celery. So this is also a way to sort of pump up the dish with a really cheap vegetable to make it last longer. When you're poor, that's what you need. And this is braised with some tomatoes and celery, as I said, a few other spices. Sometimes one of the places I've eaten it in Testaccio uses cocoa powder, which gives it a sort of mole type feel. On to the next dish. Now this dish is called Payata. You can see that it's dressed, it's sitting on pasta. And this is a very popular way of using these meat dishes. You can have them as a second course, as we have in Italy, for a meat dish, but you can also put the sauce on pasta. And payata is a Roman word for calf intestine. You can see the intestines here. And this is where it gets a little bit graphic. This is especially prized in Rome because of its creamy center, the intestine's creamy center. And where's the creamy center coming from? Well, the calf was slaughtered when it was still nursing and drinking its mother's milk. So, so it has this it has a tomato sauce, but it also it kind of turns into like almost a pink sauce because of the creaminess from the milk and the tomato sauce. Another dish we have is tripa alla romana, which is tripe. It too is braised in tomato sauce. Tripe, of course, is the cow's stomach. If you see it in a butcher's window, it's quite big, and it's kind of folded all together. One side is very smooth, the other side is sort of has some ripples on it, and it's kind of folded all together and then sliced quite thin, and goes from being really chewy to quite soft as it's braised down. It's very good. Tripe is a dish that you can find all over Italy in a number of different with a number of different preparations. In Rome, we eat it this way. Next we have Coratella. Coratella is something that Romans tend to eat with artichokes, you can see here. And it can come from a variety of different animals. In Rome, we eat it around Easter, and it often comes from lamb. In general, it comes from a smallish animal like a chicken or a rabbit, for example. And I like to say that the pieces come from just about from your stomach to from your neck to your stomach. It is heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, all of those little bits in there. And since we're talking about a small animal, they're not very big, right? So these are chopped up into smallish pieces and then sauteed. They're not, it doesn't have a long cooking process like some of the other really hard, meats that need to be cooked for a long time on a slow, very slowly to make them soft and edible. So we have artichokes with this Coratella. And that does it for all of the quinto quarto. We have all of these little bits which typically aren't eaten today, and they've found new life, and people still eat them. We'll talk a little bit later about different ways that people eat them. So as you exit the slaughterhouse, you come to a piazza, and if you look straight from the piazza out, you will see something called the Monte Testaccio. And this is the second stop of our little virtual culinary tour of Testaccio and the food of Rome. And even though you can see this aerial photo, it's enormous. It's very well integrated into the landscape of the neighborhood, so it really goes unnoticed. If you're standing in the piazza, it sort of blends in between the trees and the buildings. Business just sort of bustles around it. And so you might be surprised, even if you've traveled down there before, to learn that it's an ancient Roman trash dump. It's half a mile around if you walk around it, and it's 150 feet tall. So if we're going to talk about what the ancient Romans were dumping in their trash, we need to talk a little bit about what it is that they were eating. So, the Mediterranean diet and economy was based on essentially three things: grapes, olives, and grain. Grapes for wine, grain for, of course, bread, first a sort of porridge gruel, and then eventually leavened bread was invented, and olives for olive oil. And that's what we're going to stop to talk about mainly. As the empire grew, they began importing grain and olive oil to Rome. The Romans were incredibly proud of their local wine production, so they were not interested in importing any wine. They wanted to start bringing in grain and olive oil, and that those two products came from northern Africa and southern Spain. So they started to import olive oil into Rome. It would cross the Mediterranean Sea on a boat and stop at the port of Ostia, which is still where Romans go to the beach sometimes. And then these goods would travel down the Tiber to Testaccio, where they would be offloaded. And the olive oil was carried in these vases, which you can see here, which are called amphorae. And the amphorae held about 7 liters of oil. They could also hold wine, but mostly oil. And once the olive oil was consumed, they couldn't use them again because they're made out of ceramic. There's lots of holes and crevices in the ceramic. The oil would get in and it would start to stink. It would start to go bad, rancid, and therefore they couldn't use them anymore. So because an enormous quantity of olive oil was being funneled into the Testaccio and they couldn't use these amphorae anymore, they had to find something to do with them. So they started to crack them and lay them, sort of throw them into what is now the Monte Testaccio. So for 3 centuries, there was this constant buildup of this trash from the local olive oil economy. And you can see it was something that wasn't necessarily just sort of like dumped there. They knew what they were doing, right? The ancient Romans always knew what they were doing. And they built essentially this mountain out of these potsherds. Potsherds in Latin is testa, which is where the neighborhood gets its name, testaccio for testa. So it's literally named after these pot shards, this huge mountain of pot shards. And not only did the history of olive oil trade physically shape the neighborhood, it also, of course, transformed the cuisine. Olive oil is synonymous with Italy, right? You all know that, right? Except what we're going to talk about as being some dishes that you may not know about are all of the vegetable dishes that use olive oil. There we go with our olive oil. So Rome had a number of gardens from starting in ancient Rome and moving all the way to the Kingdom of Italy. There were these gardens right in the center of the city, and those were providing the fruits and vegetables for the people. And the diet of Rome is really fruit and vegetable based, much like the Mediterranean diet is. I mean, you've probably heard about how healthy the Mediterranean diet is, how people there, and a huge number of centenarians in Italy, and it's mostly because they're eating lots of vegetables that are incredibly nutritious. The first of which are leafy greens. So I'm going to talk to you guys about all of these vegetable dishes that we have in Rome that can't be found anyplace else that also, of course, use olive oil. The first one is Chicory, which is what you can see on your screen. Chicory is a bitter green, and there are a number of different bitter greens that we eat in Rome. People eat piles and piles of greens. They eat a pile of greens for dinner sometimes with a bit of bread and maybe a bit of cheese. Italians like bitterness and bitter food. And so we have Chicory, we have misticanza, which is something that people eat in Rome. We have broccoletti, which is another bitter green. It's kind of like broccoli rabe, but it's leafier, it's more bitter. And you boil these greens, and then what you do is saute them with some aglio, olio, peperoncino, which would be olive oil, garlic, and as you can see here, some crushed red pepper or fresh red pepper, and very delicious. This is where we're getting to things that are a little bit more enticing, perhaps, than the cat intestine. But I guess it depends on your taste in food. I prefer the veggies. So the next dish that we have is one that all Italians, or many Italians, know as being Roman, and that is carciofi alla romana. Carciofi alla romana are artichokes, Roman-style artichokes, which are braised, and they are braised in olive oil and wine, perhaps a bit of water. They're stuffed in the center with Roman mint, garlic, and parsley. They're flipped upside down, kind of like flour side down, put in a pot and braised for a long time. One thing that's interesting about artichokes, the way that they're prepared here, is that they trim a significant amount of the artichoke off initially, and then they eat the entire thing. So you can see the stem has been trimmed off sort of around the side, but that the stem that's there, you can eat. A lot of times in the States, we don't really trim that much off the artichoke, but then you sort of eat it like this, and then you end up throwing away a bit. Well, we're throwing away bits first and then eating the whole thing. Unbelievably delicious. We also have Vignarola, which is a sort of spring vegetable mix, which is, of course, cooked in olive oil. It too has artichokes, which are both a spring and winter vegetable, but in this case we'll have depending on the variety. In this case, in the Vignarola, we'll have one of the spring varieties of artichoke, fava beans, peas, sometimes asparagus is thrown in, and this is a really nice fresh mix of spring vegetables that's cooked in olive oil. That's quite delicious. Puntarelle is the last veggie dish that is cooked, has olive oil. This is a raw salad, essentially made of puntarelle, which is kind of chicory. You can kind of see in the bottom. It's a head of chicory, essentially, and the leaves are trimmed off, and there are these white stalks, and the white stalks basically we're taking something that kind of is inedible and making it edible by preparing it a certain way and giving it lots of flavor. So the way that it's prepared is the stalk is cut off and then it's pushed through a sort of sharp sieve. And when it's pushed through the sharp sieve, these little stalks and curlicues kind of pop off. And so it's a little bit easier to eat. And then it's marinated in this incredibly intense dressing, which is a lot of anchovies, garlic, either lemon juice or vinegar, depending on your preference, and of course, olive oil. It's kind of like a bagna cauda, which exists in the States sometimes. This really umami breath killer of a dish, but it's really delicious. So that is the rest of the veggie and olive oil combination that I have for you today. So as you can see, food in Italy is deeply connected to place, slaughterhouse, Monte d'Estaccio, the place and its history. It was the food that physically shaped Testaccio in Rome and then subsequently influenced the cuisine. The dishes that we went over today can be found only in Rome. And as soon as you travel outside of Rome, you can no longer find them. You'll start to find a whole nother range of dishes that are waiting to be discovered. So yeah, that's all I have for you about Testaccio.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation, Elizabeth. We will, we'll kind of touch on a lot of these points that you brought up throughout the next portion of this espresso, where we will have a series of moderated questions where Elizabeth and I will just kind of talk about these topics. For the audience, if you have any questions about anything that Elizabeth has said or anything that we're discussing, I put it in the Zoom chat earlier, but let me resend it so you have in case you joined. New since then. If you follow that link, you should be able to put in whatever question you have, and we will try to have a Q&A session towards the end of the hour where we can entertain the questions that you might have. And throughout this next portion, Costanza from the Rome Global Gateway may be sharing some of the visuals for the foods. If you weren't hungry already from all the wonderful foods, it's approaching lunchtime here in Eastern time in the US, so I was getting quite hungry myself. But let's continue the discussion on the food, specifically in Rome first. Elizabeth, so what are some of the dishes that, besides what you brought up from Testaccio, some other dishes that we can't miss in Rome? If we were to travel there, what are some things that we have to try?
Yes, there's a number of other dishes that I didn't touch on. There are supplì al telefono, which is a sort of rice ball. Very similar to an arancino, perhaps people have tried, they've become popular in the States recently, although it's shaped in a sort of oval shape. It's a rice ball that the rice has tomato sauce, and inside there are some cubes of mozzarella. And when the rice ball or rice log is fried, the mozzarella gets stringy. And when you eat it, you sort of get this string of mozzarella, you can see on the picture. And they're called supplì al telefono because it looks like a telephone string coming out of your mouth. So those are really delicious. It's a sort of street food that you could just get while you're out and about around the city of Rome. There are a number of other pasta dishes. One of the things that people really remember, I think, from traveling to Rome are the 4 classic pasta dishes, Roman pasta dishes. And they're kind of interesting because they all build off of one another. So the most simple one is in the top left. It's cacio e pepe. Cacio e pepe has become, I think, fairly popular even for there, I've seen lots of recipes that people are making it outside of Rome and outside of Italy. And it essentially is pecorino romano cheese, which is the Roman version of a sheep's milk cheese, and pepper. It's emulsified with pasta water and then put on pasta. The classic pasta for this is tonarelli, which is a fresh, very thick spaghetti. Now, if you go one sort of step up from that, you can add guanciale, which is pork cheek, or pancetta, which is the belly. If you add bits of this to cacio e pepe, essentially, you'll have what's just below it, which is pasta alla griscia. If you add eggs, just eggs, no cream, no peas, nothing else, eggs to the cacio e pepe, you will have carbonara, spaghetti alla carbonara. We also use rigatoni, mezze maniche, which are like short sleeves, which are sort of similar to rigatoni. And then last, if you take away the eggs and you add tomatoes, you will have pasta alla matriciana or bucatini alla matriciana, and this is some pork with the tomato sauce. Before tomatoes existed in Italy, before Columbus, cacio e pepe, carbonara, or pasta alla griscia would be the kinds of ways that people were dressing pasta. Sometimes hard to imagine Italy before tomatoes, but there was many hundreds of years that we didn't have the tomato in Italy, and those are the kinds of dishes that they might be eating before the tomato. The last dish that is really delicious that we have in Rome is gnocchi alla romana. Now, gnocchi also existed in Italy before there was the potato. Both the potato and the tomato came over post with Columbus, essentially. And Italians were making gnocchi before there was the potato. So what were they making out of? They were making out of just flour. They were making them out of bread or breadcrumbs. This is made out of semolina, and they're little discs, kind of similar to polenta, cut out and then served in a sort of gratin style with some Parmesan, sometimes some sage. It's really delicious. In Rome, we have giovedì gnocchi, which you eat gnocchi on Thursdays in the classic trattoria. So those are the things that if you come to Rome, and I hope you'll do sometime soon, those are the things you got to try.
I particularly really enjoyed the carbonara while I was there, and I've tried to recreate some of the recipes since coming back to the States, but it's been really hard without the right ingredients.
Yeah.
So I await the day I can return and have some more in Rome. You brought up the supplì as a more of a street food in Rome. So I guess more on the street food, contemporary food side of things, what are some of the contemporary, you brought up Testaccio kind of as a model of what we're looking at in terms of the food, but what's the contemporary food scene look like in Testaccio?
So Testaccio is this amazing mix, as I mentioned, of the contemporary and the incredibly ancient. So when you're walking around Testaccio, you can see sushi, you can see there's a Spanish tapas bar, there's just a huge gamut of these sort of modern eateries, in addition to these really classic places that, like the grandmas outside making the gnocchi and stuff. But there's this really amazing street food place in Testaccio, which has invented a new kind of street food. But they're drawing on some of these classic dishes in Rome and in Testaccio. So there's something called the Trapezino, which is there we go. It's a basically like a pocket of pizza, shaped like a tramezzino, which is the little triangle sandwich here, which is all over Italy, kind of boring, can be good, but if you go to a regular bar, nothing fabulous. But if you mix that with pizza, the tramezzino with pizza, you have the trapezino, And in Rome, the sort of like very simple pizza we say is pizza bianca. It's a white pizza. It's just focaccia, basically. Well, it's much better than just focaccia. It's a delicious focaccia with stuffed with something inside. And this Stefano Caligari, who invented the Trapezino in the last decade, stuffs them with classic Roman dishes. And some of these quinto quarto dishes, you can go and get tongue in your Trapezino. You can go and get a meatball in your Trapezino. They're really great, and they are, my students really love them because they're ways to try a lot of these second course, like big meat dishes, without sitting down to a whole meal and having, a whole plate of calf intestines. Maybe you just want to try it in a little pocket of pizza. It's not as risky if you don't like those kinds of dishes.
Actually, for the audience that might not be aware, can you briefly mention the first, second course culture in Italy for dinners?
Yeah, so the way that the classic Italian meal is divided is it's sort of strictly divided, right? So we have the Antipasto, which is an appetizer, which can be a little bit of prosciutto or a little bit of mozzarella or just something sort of little to get you started. Then you have the first course, which is typically pasta, but it can also be rice or a soup with a little bit of rice or pasta or a grain in general. And then you have the second course, which is meat or fish. And these are all divided. They're served in different moments. The waiter will bring, bust your pasta plate and then bring your meat plate next. It's not all on one dish. And then we have a side dish, and the side dishes are always vegetables. And those sometimes are served with the meat and sometimes served after the meat, oftentimes with. And then we have the dessert. And that's actually why that Italians never eat their salad first. And in the States, we're used to having their salad as the appetizer, as like the way to start the meal. In Italy, we always have the salad afterwards because it's a vegetable and it's either eaten with the meat or at the end.
One of my favorite stories to tell from my time in Rome was the first day I got to Rome and I met my host family. I had a wonderful, basically an Italian nonna, a grandma, who was cooking me these amazing meals. I had learned about the first, second dish, tradition, but I'd forgotten about it. So she brought up me a big plate of pasta as the primo, as the first, and I really enjoyed it. And she asked me if I wanted more. And so thinking that this was going to be the only thing, even though I was pretty full already, I downed a second plate of pasta as well. And then she continues to bring out more meat and then more salad, and just the food just kept coming on and on and on. And as a first day, I didn't want to be disrespectful and not eat all the food that she brought out. So I was quite full afterwards. I felt like I had 3 meals worth of food on that first day, but it was a fantastic introduction, I think, to the primo secondo kind of culture in Italy. So thank you for saying that.
Sorry. Yeah, it's actually funny because that's really the classic meal, but I'm always sort of telling my students about how when they go to a restaurant, not everyone orders all of those dishes. When you sit down to dinner, when I sit down to dinner tonight, I haven't made antipasto first course, second course,
right.
Contorno, the side dish. That is what you do if you have a special meal, if you go to someone's house for the first time, if you're at a wedding, or you go out with your friends for a special occasion. But oftentimes what Italians actually, like what modern Italians do, is divide that whole meal over an entire day. So they'll have a pasta at lunch and a meat dish at dinner, or some meat at lunch and a grain at dinner. And then that way you sort of have a balanced meal over the entire day, instead of having, in America, we think like each plate should have some grain, some veggies, some meat. But instead here, oftentimes people think of it as divided over the whole day instead of at each meal.
Cool. Okay, so let's continue talking about the Roman cuisine. What maybe we could talk about what are the other parts of Rome that have contributed to the cuisine besides Testaccio?
Yeah, there are a number of other neighborhoods that have contributed greatly to the cuisine that we have in Rome today. One of the most interesting, I'd say, is the Jewish Ghetto. So ghetto is actually a word that comes from the Venetian dialect, and so it started here. It doesn't have a negative connotation necessarily. And it is where in 1555, the Pope segregated the Jews in Rome who had been there since the second century. They were the Maccabees. The Jews in Rome have been in Rome longer than many other groups, religious communities. And this little neighborhood has provided some of the most exquisite specialties that we have in Rome today. So we also have, I talked to you before about the Roman artichoke. We also have the Jewish artichoke, the carciofa alla giudia, which is fried in olive oil twice. And they're kind of like bashed down. You can see they're flattened, and they're fried in two different temperatures of olive oil. So the crispiness is to a point of perfection. And they're unbelievable. The Jewish cuisine is, I read a scholarly article just recently that said something like 80% of all Roman cuisine started out as originally Jewish. So Jewish cuisine is dictated by kosher laws, and it's dictated by poverty, as we talked about in the slaughterhouse in Testaccio. And there are some really interesting dishes. These vegetables that people like the artichoke, the tomato, the eggplant. Those were things that vegetables that people were really uninterested in eating. They had come from the Americas. People were afraid of them. They thought they were going to make them sick. And so who got stuck with them? The poor. And of course, they're coming up with really innovative ways to eat them. And of course, they came up with something delicious. So there are a lot of eggplant dishes, tomato dishes, cured fish, really sort of simple fish. There's also a curly endive and anchovy dish, which is like the absolute cheapest fish you can buy. The anchovy, the absolute cheapest vegetable you can buy. Salad. Cook it into a sort of baked dish, and you have this really delicious curly endive and anchovy dish, which is really delicious too. We also have a pastry, which is a sort of pie with ricotta and dark cherries. And a lot of times when it's called a crostata, which would be like a pie. And nowadays we have a lattice tart, with a crust on top, but in the Jewish ghetto, they often have covered it completely with a pastry. And that's said because when the Jews were locked in the ghetto, they couldn't bring dairy into the ghetto. And so they're said to have made these pies with ricotta and cherries and covered it completely with the pastry crust so that the guards wouldn't know that they were bringing in dairy into the ghetto. So there are lots of different dishes, lots of different stories about how impoverished they were, and the conditions that sort of led to the creation of some really delicious dishes today, and that now, of course, are expensive and prized, when before they were something that no one wanted.
Yeah, that's actually, I didn't know a lot of this. That's really interesting to know, like kind of the history and the cultural background of, I mean, the crostata I almost had every day while I was in Rome. whether it be just for breakfast or for snacks. So that's actually really, really good to know.
Dessert for breakfast. Dessert is good for breakfast here. We're big on that in Italy.
I remember just having, some kind of dessert and then just a cappuccino, and that'd be the breakfast right there. So I mean, talking about these kind of cultural and historical influences that history and culture does, the influence that it has on food. You mentioned earlier how once you step outside of Rome, you have a completely new set of foods almost. And that's something that maybe that is not as familiar to Americans. Even though we have a little bit of regional foods, I don't think the foods in America is necessarily as divided or diversified as the foods are in the different regions of Italy. Can you just briefly talk about maybe more of the cultural and historical influences that drive that variety?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking while you were saying this, like, it's possible that if you went to Milan and showed them all of these dishes that I just talked about that came from pistachio or came from Rome, they would be aware of maybe 50%, maybe none, maybe 75%. I mean, there's just so many local specialties and traditions that you could spend a lifetime learning about them all. And that's why I'm still here, trying all the food and all the wine that exists. So yeah, there's just a huge variety from place to place, and each region has its own history. Each region has its own geography, different seasons. And so all of those come together to make this what we now have local cuisine in each place. And it all it changes so quickly. There's this concept of campanalismo, where each group of people who live under one bell tower, so under one church, and we all know that there's millions of churches in Italy, the cuisine changes from church to church, basically. And those people are faithful to their local soccer team. They feel very connected. And so basically geographical borders don't necessarily follow what has been thousands of years of creating this cuisine. So for example, in Emilia-Romagna, that's one region where the city of Bologna is. Perhaps some people have traveled to Bologna before. In Emilia-Romagna, we have, in Bologna, they eat pasta called tortellini, which probably heard of tortellini. Tortellini are only filled with pork products, and they're eaten in broth. So you can see it's a soup. If you go over to Romagna, to the other side, which is still the same part of the same region, they're eating a different kind of typical pasta. They're called tortelli, which is very close, even linguistically, to tortellini, a little bit bigger because the ino means small. And they're filling their tortelli with spinach and ricotta. Now, of course, there's a huge a difference between what they're filling these pastas with, in addition to their shape being different and the size being different. The people in Romagna had influence of the ancient Romans, who had a lot of sheep grazing in their sort of pastoral lands, and therefore, of course, they have ricotta. So if they have ricotta hanging around, they're going to fill their pasta with ricotta. Whereas on the other side, in Emilia, we have a more of Germanic influences in the past. They tend to have a more meat-based diet, and therefore they're bringing pork products into their pasta and then eating them that way. So just because we have one region, these geographical boundaries don't necessarily dictate what people are eating. It's the historical influence and the geography and the topography that basically tell people what to eat, because that's what's there.
I see. there is so many more questions I want to ask, but the time is just flying by today. We only have about 10 minutes left in the hour. So maybe I can move on to some of the audience's questions that we have received and maybe mix in a little bit of something else that I wanted to ask as well. One of the questions, this is from David Younger. Well, maybe the same David that actually led me to Rome back at Notre Dame. So hello, David. Thank you for the question. He asked, could you discuss the various types of dessert, wine, and beverages in Italy, and maybe how they are derived in cultural nuances, and maybe along with that you can talk a very little bit about your experience as a wine guide so far in Italy as well.
Yeah, so the world of wine is as vast as Pliny said that there are as many grape varieties in Italy as there are grains of sand on the coast of Italy. So and in fact, he was right, because there are more grape varieties in Italy than any other country in the world. There are more olive cultivars in Italy than in Spain, for example. So the variety is just endless, just like the food traditions are endless. The actual varieties, plant varieties, are endless. So the grapes to try just go on and on. And that's one of the real big differences between winemaking in Italy and winemaking in the States, for example. Winemaking in Italy is based on tradition, and it's based on working with the local variety, whereas winemaking in the States is based on innovation. There aren't so many or very, very few local grapes to California or Oregon. And so the winemaking there is based on innovation. How can we work this treat these grapes in a different way to come up with a different kind of wine? But in Italy, we have all of these different cultivars. Some of them are sweet wines. We have dessert wines, which are very delicious. One of my favorites is called Zebibo, which is comes from the Arabic word for grape. Excuse me, the Arabic word for raisin, which is also called, which is grown on the island of Pantelleria, which is off the southern coast of Sicily. It's very close to Africa. There was a long Arab rule there. That's why the name of the grape is called Zebibo. And it's a passito. So there's a number of different ways to make wine, make sweet wine. One of them is letting the grapes dry out in the hot Sicilian sun into raisins. That's why the grape is called a raisin in Arabic, and then vinifying the grapes. So you get this really sweet, thick nectar of a dessert wine that has tastes like flowers and dried apricots and honey, and it is perfectly paired with a Sicilian cannolo, with a cannoli, and it's just an amazing pairing. I oftentimes do that with my students. Cannolis and this passito di Pantelleria is an amazing pairing.
That does sound fantastic. Just getting hungry by the hour. Actually, on the topic of dessert, we have a question from Andra from Indianapolis. No, sorry, there was a question from Andra, which was that can we get the names of these dishes in writing, which maybe hopefully we can work out with the RGG in some kind of sending it out to the registrants. We have a question from Fritz, who asks, when they think of meals, they often think of Bologna, but when they think of gelato, they think of Rome. Maybe can we talk about any favorite or interesting stories of Roman gelato, or maybe just about gelato in general, just a little bit?
Yeah, gelato is a delicious dessert. Let's see, do I have any stories about gelato? There are lots. Gelato is a place in the food world where there is a lot of innovation, actually, currently. Like I was saying before, food traditions is something that are sacrosanct. Oftentimes, innovation in the world of food just doesn't exist, or you might be called crazy if you're trying to mess with grandma's recipes. But gelato is one of those places where they're coming up with incredibly interesting sort of flavors. One thing that's interesting is there are a lot of dairy-free gelatos that people naturally make. So they make a lot of chocolate dairy-free gelatos. All of the fruit-flavored gelatos are dairy-free. And gelato is different inherently from ice cream because it's held at a lower temperature. So if you take it home and you put it in your freezer, it changes completely, kind of like ice cream, but you don't scoop it. When you're here at a gelateria, they serve it with like a paddle, and they sort of like swipe it on the cone because it's softer. It's held at a warmer temperature. So it's not scooped in a ball. It's just sort of like swiped into the cup or onto the cone.
Yeah, and I mean, personally too, just from personal experience, I loved the gelato in Rome. And when my family visited me while I was studying there, I think my sister was even more in love with it. We had something like 4 different gelaterias in one day, but it just never got old, so many different flavors and so refreshing on a hot Roman day. So definitely one of the favorite things while I was in Rome. Maybe one last question, and then we can kind of start to wrap up. And this goes back to the testaccio in the beginning of the presentation. Are the quinto quarto dishes still popular among younger Italians? With more convenience foods, I was wondering if these food traditions might fade, and this is from Megan.
Yeah, I mean, in general, their food traditions do fade. However, there is a bit of, I'd say they're fading less here than perhaps in other places because tradition is so important. There's actually this Instagram or on Facebook or on social media in general, these pasta grannies, if people have heard of them. It's a sort of way to preserve traditions of grandmas and nonne making pasta. So there's a million different ways to make pasta. And they're preserving these traditions. This is one way you can preserve traditions with social media and the internet. But so yes, people, I'd say they are slightly losing. But people do. You go into a trattoria in Testaccio, and there's Payata on the menu. There's Coratella vaccinata. There might not be 12 dishes from the Quinto Quarto, but there's 3, 4, 5, and then you'll also see them dressed on pasta. So one of my favorite ways to eat the Coratella vaccinata is to have the coda sauce on pasta. So you eating maybe less of it, but yeah, people definitely still eat all of those dishes. Coratella on Easter, people are definitely consuming them. So it's not something that's faded away.
Fantastic. Yeah, there were so many other questions, like I said, that I wanted to kind of get to, and just so much more to Italian food culture. I mean, we didn't get to talk about wine as much. We didn't get to talk about olive oil, cheeses, coffee, even the pizza. We could briefly mention it, but we didn't get to talk about it in depth. But hopefully this discussion kind of led everybody to see that Italian food is definitely more than just pizza and pasta, and there's so much variety and history and culture that goes into the different food scenes. So thank you, Elizabeth, for answering all of the questions and the presentation.
Thank you. I wanted to just share with people a quick bibliography, which is perhaps some good reading for people if they're interested. And then on the right side of the screen, I also have some of my favorite books and television series that are on Italy. So some Netflix shows, a recipe book, a cookbook. It's called 5 Quarters on the Quinto Quarto. It's really great, by Rachel Roddy, if you're interested in learning more about the Quinto Quarto. She writes for The Guardian, so she always has a column out, which is really good, great, excellent Italian, well-researched cooking reading. And then there's just 2 other books about Italian food that I recommend. I also have an Instagram feed that I'm posting little bits of history, food history, and sort of food current events if anyone's interested. And yeah, if you could always contact me by email. And maybe we can find a way to sort of wrap up with some of the other the lists of the names, like the dishes that someone was asking about before too. That way everyone can continue their culinary education.
Thank you. Sylvia, I think you wanted to say a couple things in closing, right?
Very briefly, simply thanking you, Elizabeth and Ryan, for this wonderful sweat through, you know, essentially thousands of years of cuisine. And I can confirm, not being from Rome, that half of the dishes that you mentioned I only learned about when I moved to Rome. So it is absolutely true that you know, diversity on food and wines is definitely you know, a reality in Italy still. A video recording of today's Espresso will be available beginning tomorrow on our website, so the Rome Global Gateway website, on the page dedicated to Espresso. And, and the last thing I wanted to mention is that we will have a second episode of Espresso coming up in June. You will be all, of course, more than welcome to join. We'll find Ryan then again. Elizabeth, it has been a great pleasure to have you and everybody else with us today. Thank you and buona giornata. A presto.